Welcome to the Bulldog Breakdown. Buck Belue with Hutson Mason, Week 1, Vanderbilt, Georgia, getting things started. Let's talk about the expectations of this Georgia team coming into this 2019 season. Georgia preseason number 3. Yep. Much is expected of the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I think you have to start with the expectations to win the East. Obviously, this team, after 3 years of Kirby stacking number 1, number 2 recruiting classes, a plethora of 5-stars on top of each other. He's had his time. He's come close to the big dance against Alabama in the SEC championship and now the national championship. And look, Kirby has gotten Georgia to the cream of the crop in college football quicker than Nick got Alabama there. Now the last step is just getting past Alabama. I think, again, if you're talking about expectations, it's to be in Atlanta and to get past Alabama this year, whether it's in the SEC championship or the national championship.
Best I remember, when Kirby was hired to be the Georgia football coach, people looked 2 or 3 years down the road, giving him a chance to turn the battleship around in shallow water, some people would say.
Yeah.
So he's had time to do that, stockpile some talent like you're talking about. So Bulldog fans are expecting a championship this season. SEC East, you talked about, looks like they've got a pretty good path of capturing the East again here. SEC title game, you're talking about a showdown with Alabama again. Georgia, can they get over this Crimson Tide hump? Do you see enough talent compiled to give Georgia fans hope that this is the year they get over Alabama?
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely there is. There's just as much talent on that roster at Georgia. And as you know, it's not so much about the first-string talent. When you play Alabama, your second-string and your third-string guys better be pretty freaking good as well. I think Alabama, where they stick out to me, is at the receiver position. They're 3 guys, Jerry Jeudy, Waddle, Ruggs. Those are all 3 NFL Sunday receivers. And then you match that, Buck, with a Heisman Trophy, potentially a Heisman Trophy candidate in Tua Tagovailoa. That passing effect is going to be, or that passing attack is going to be extremely lethal this year. So Georgia just as good. And the good thing is you get them late in December if you're going to play them. It's not to begin the season. You get several games to figure out what you're good at, what you're bad at, and then hopefully come December you're playing your best football.
A lot of new faces. Georgia lost some really key pieces to last year's team that came close to doing some really special things. Yeah. So a lot of young guys are going to get plugged in on both sides of the ball. We're going to be breaking down the offense and the defense coming up here in just a moment. But young guys stepping in, much is expected. Kirby, with coaching staff changes too, you got new coordinators on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, coordinators on both sides of the ball, and you've got one guy who's a new defensive coordinator in himself, Dan Lanning, who was coaching outside linebackers last year, but he's in his early 30s, never been a coordinator before, let alone at Georgia in the SEC and handling that pressure. Good thing is he's got Kirby Smart right by his side.
Isn't Kirby really the defensive coordinator?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I think sometimes we, especially on the defensive side of the ball, we probably give a little bit too much credit to great game plans and stuff like that, because the ship kind of rights itself. The game planning is done during the week. Kirby's in the meetings. He's going to be very hands-on. I think offensively on the other side of the ball, it's a little bit more of a concern for me with Georgia's new offensive coordinator, Coach Coley. He's been coaching quarterbacks as of last year. I like that, Buck, because he started to build that relationship with Jake Fromm. He's not going out there week 1, and those guys are on a new page of communication, so they'll know each other. They know what Jake likes. They know what Coley likes to call. But he's called plays at Miami. And no disrespect to Miami in the ACC, but the depth of the ACC and the challenge of calling plays in the ACC and ACC defenses is totally different than the gauntlet of the SEC. So you're right, 2 big question marks of how these coordinators are going to adjust calling plays for the first time in the Southeastern Conference.
All right, coming up, we'll break this thing down on the offensive side of the ball. I'm glad you're with us here on the Bulldog Breakdown. All right, Hut, let's talk about this Bulldog offense. New coordinator James Coley takes over a very talented group. Of course, everybody's speaking about the Georgia offensive line, perhaps the best in college football across the board, with Wilson and Thomas at the bookend tackle spots, looking like 2 first-round picks. You got big Trey Hill stepping in at center. He's the only new starter. Yeah. As you look at things. Kenley at left guard. You got Cleveland at the right guard. Cade Mays is ready to step in there. At any of these 5 positions, they look rock solid up front. And that is good news for Jake Fromm, DeAndre Swift, and these young wide receivers.
There's 9 guys along Georgia's offensive line that have started a game. So you can almost put together 2 starting lineups along the offensive line for the Georgia Bulldogs this year. There's not a lot of teams, if there's any other team in college football that could say they have 9 guys that have starting experience. So that's going to be very valuable, as you know, and we saw last year when one guy goes down. It's the nature of playing football. Somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody will get banged up. You've got a guy like Cade Mays that can come in. You got a guy like Ben Cleveland, and they're not just stuck at playing the right guard position. You've heard during camp, and I've read during camp where, they're moving, Thomas to right tackle in case somebody goes down, or Cade Mays to left guard. You better be able to play and be interchangeable along that offensive line.
Yeah, Coach Pittman's doing a great job. So they should be able to run the football. And this is what Kirby Smart wants to do first and foremost, a physical running game and a balanced pro-style attack. And certainly running back looks really good. DeAndre Swift, limited a little bit during the preseason. Hoping to see him get featured. He's a guy that can do it all. He can run between the tackles. He can hit the big play outside in the run game. Excellent receiver, but it doesn't stop there. Harrian's a solid senior back that's going to get time. You got Cook, looks like a situational third down back to me, where you want to get him the ball in space in the passing game. And then the big wild card here, Zamir White has made it through camp and has looked really good doing it. I'm expecting to see a lot of Zamir White here to start the season.
Yeah, I'm excited to see Zamir, not only for all the hype of coming out of high school, former 5-star, but here's a guy who's just endured a lot of adversity, right? ACL injuries. He's been having to wear braces on his knees, rehabbing, and finally he just gets the opportunity to be healthy for the first time in a long time and go play the game he loves. And for a long time, Buck, we've seen Georgia, they've had a great 1-2 punch, Gurley, Chubb, sometimes even 3 great running backs. I think there's a bit of a question mark when you get below DeAndre Swift. Brian Harrian, a senior, just hasn't had the workload that other running backs have had in the past couple years, but he's been in the system. He can pass protect. So you don't have to take him off the field on third down. And then some of these young guys, Zamir White and Cooks, really excited to see against Vanderbilt the workload and how do they kind of distribute the rock between those guys.
The big question mark obviously is at wide receiver, where Jake Fromm threw to a lot of experienced NFL caliber guys a year ago. Flip the page to this season, suddenly you got a lot of unproven guys that are looking to make their mark. At receiver, I think Simmons is a starter. He's separated with his experience as a senior. Look for Simmons to be getting a start there. I think Demetrius Robertson in the slot looks like a legitimate experienced target there that they can utilize. And then that third wide receiver spot, where I'm expecting to see a lot of these big receivers in there. Landers at 6'4", 6'5". You got Cager out of Miami at 6'5". You got this new kid. Everybody wants to see George Pickens in that single wide receiver set. It's going to be interesting to see which one of these guys step up.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, too, to see how often and how much Georgia and Jake Fromm decide to throw the football early on against Vanderbilt. Obviously, with that offensive line, those running backs, you got to assume they're going to come out and just try to pound it down your throat and wear out a little bit of that undersized Vanderbilt defensive line. But make no mistake about it, to get to where you want to get to this year, you're going to have to be balanced, and you're going to have to throw the football and be very good at it if you want to get past Alabama and beyond that in the college football playoff. So I think this position group, out of all the 7 teams that we have right now as kind of picked to win a national championship, I think this position group for Georgia is the biggest question mark out of all the teams. Not saying they obviously don't have the big P word of potential, because they do. They got 2 5-stars in Demetrius Robertson and George Pickens now in that position group, but just don't have a lot of production coming back from last year. Matt Landers was their leading receiver, and he had 9 catches. So that's probably the one position group I'm the most eager to see come this weekend.
Yeah, I really believe what's going to happen is you won't see as a sophisticated passing game out of Georgia this year as you did a year ago. You had proven, experienced players you're throwing the ball to a year ago. This year, I think it's going to be more of Jake reading to see when that eighth defender comes down into the box, and when he sees that eighth defender to come down in the box to help stop that Georgia running game, is when you're going to see Fromm take some shots now down vertically on the outside parts of the field. Again, where you have these big wide receivers, 50-50 balls, intermediate to deep down the field. We've got guys that can win those battles now, and I'm expecting it to be more about that than a sophisticated passing game like we saw last season.
And what about the tight end position? Here's a position that seems like it's kind of disappeared recently for the Dogs. When you played and I played, you go back to Leonard Pope and Orson Charles, and I know those are some of the newer names, but Georgia has always utilized the tight end. And the past couple years in Chaney's offense, just wasn't as much of a factor. This year, they get the grad transfer from Tennessee, Wolf, who played a lot in the SEC. You like that. Hopefully, he can learn the system and make an impact early. Charlie Warner, hopefully, he can step up. So I would think the tight end position is something that Jake Fromm is looking to use, especially with a little bit of inexperience on the outside.
Yeah, and Georgia obviously will get some of the best quarterback performance level in college football. Fromm has been excellent as a freshman and a sophomore. Gosh, he's going to be even better in his junior season. So Georgia will get great quarterback play, which will help them tremendously on the offensive side of the ball. On the other side, we'll talk about this Georgia defense, new coordinator over there, a lot of new faces. As we look ahead here on the Bulldog Breakdown.
Be a part of radio history here in Atlanta by securing the 680 The Fan 25th Anniversary Retro T-shirt, like Hutson Mason and I are wearing right now.
Great thing is all proceeds will go to a great cause. Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, all the great folks over there will benefit from it. You can get your shirt and hat, trucker hat. That's always great for the summertime. 680thefan.com/retrobuck. People may get that confused with Metro because we're going to look so good in it.
Don't fool around. Do it now and be looking good.
Buck and Hut here on the Bulldog Breakdown. Let's talk about this Georgia defense coming into the year. One thing I want to see is Georgia to be better against the running game. And for that to happen, thinking big number 99 is the big key there in the middle of that Georgia defensive line. 340 pounds, taking on multiple blockers, freeing up linebackers to make plays. I think Jordan Davis is probably the key to this Georgia defense.
Yeah, David Marshall, Tyler Clark, a lot of those guys. They need more depth, and they've got that. They went out and addressed that in recruiting. But also, they just need better play out of those guys. And I think it starts interior. Everybody always thinks stopping the run is about, or just, havoc rate is a sexy term. Everyone get sacks, force fumbles. Well, last year, Georgia went through a 4-game span against Middle Tennessee State, Missouri, where they gave up 180 yards per game. And Kirby, as a defensive guy, not happy about that. So the interior part of that defense hopefully has stiffened up for the Dogs, and I think you're right. It starts in the interior part of that defensive line, Clark, Jordan Davis. Can they absorb double teams? And it's not glorious. People don't necessarily say, hey, man, great job taking that double block on or double team block by the right guard and center. But what it allows is the middle linebackers and some of those other guys to run around free and make tackles. More of an assist guy than anything else.
Yeah, safety looks like they've got one of the better tandems in college football with LeCount and J.R. Reed. That should be solid. I think another big area is cornerback, Hudson, where a year ago they had Baker that was an All-American cornerback that was really a lockdown guy, didn't get beat all season long. But on the other side, it was a weakness. Campbell got the start there. They replaced him a little later in the season. So one side was awesome, the other side not so much. So I think the cornerback group as a whole needs to be better. And I'm pretty excited about what they're going to bring to the table here. You got a couple of guys coming back. Stokes, that has played a lot of football. He looks pretty solid on one side. Campbell getting a lot of reps on the other. But as I understand it, you got Daniel now that has come on, is really pushing him. He could be a starter. Yeah. You got Stevenson, a freshman, pushing Stokes on the other side. Apparently, Georgia has 4 cornerbacks that they're believing in right now.
Yeah, secondary strong. I think it starts at the safety position, like you mentioned. Richard LeCount, former 5-star, now in year 3. J.R. Reed is like the quarterback of the secondary, almost of the whole defense. He's been there for so long. he can get the guys lined up. A little younger at the cornerback positions. Last year, you had an All-American who didn't give up a touchdown at all the whole season. So, obviously, the big question of Georgia will probably be attacked on both sides of the field this year, because offenses last year looked over there and they said, yeah, we're not throwing the ball over there. We're just going to work the right side of the field.
Made it easy for the quarterback.
Made it easy for the quarterback. So I don't think there's any glaring holes by any means. Kirby's done a great job, again, adding depth to that position. If a guy goes down, you mentioned it, Stevenson, Webb at the nickelback position. There's a lot of guys, I think, that are going to be played in the nickel, which is five-dime defense.
Yeah. Really like Daniel, the junior college cornerback that comes in, did a great job in bowl practice last year, going into the Texas Sugar Bowl game, covering Godwin and Ridley and Hardeman, and impressing Kirby in his ability to do that on the scout team. Looked good in the spring. He's come on here during camp. Look for Daniel to be very impressive playing that cornerback spot. And look, at the end of the day, Georgia ranked number 3 in the country coming into the year. Who's 1 and 2? Alabama and Clemson. Sooner or later, you're going to have to whip those two elite programs, and they've got the 2 best wide receiver cores in college football. Georgia's got to be able to match up at cornerback.
They do. Alabama, I mentioned their big 3 earlier. Clemson's got a big 3 of their receiving core, mixed in with Travis Etienne, one of the best running backs.
Ross, Higgins. I mean, they got some freshmen looking good. Clemson's loaded up at receiver also.
And loaded at quarterback. So Georgia is going to have their hands full, but let's worry about the regular season first before you get there. But by no means do I think Georgia is far off from those top 2 teams in college football.
Linebacker, inside and out, a lot of young talent. They've had to coach up. I can't wait to see who emerges. I'm excited about Monty Rice there in the middle. Inside, outside, need some edge rushers to show themselves. They've got a lot of guys looking to step in and grab that spot. We're going to see how that unfolds early in the season. Georgia defense, got to be rugged. You want to win a championship. It's the Bulldog Breakdown. We'll talk about Vanderbilt in the season opening game here on the other side. Bulldog season gets underway with a trip to Nashville, a great trip for the Bulldog fans. They're going to always enjoy Nashville. It's really a hot town. Tickets pretty easy to come by up there to check out the Dogs taking on Vanderbilt. SEC game to start the year. Most of the players are looking forward to this.
I like it. You come out the gate, you get to hopefully gain a game in the conference standings. Everybody else is out there playing cupcake games, and they're not really figuring out who they are, what their strengths and their weaknesses are. And Vanderbilt can sometimes be a little bit of a trap game. You go up there, and the stadium isn't exactly packed, and it's not slammed. There'll probably be more Georgia fans than there will be Vanderbilt fans this year. But Coach Mason up there has done a tremendous job kind of taking over for that program the past couple years, getting them to a couple bowl games. They've beaten Tennessee the past 3 seasons. They're replacing their starting quarterback and Kyle Shermer, who broke all of Jay Cutler's records. So Kyler Neal comes in from Ball State. You got to be ready to go.
Yeah, Vanderbilt plays really fundamentally sound football, which would be a good test for this young Georgia team. So keep an eye on that. They also have an NFL caliber running back. They'll test that Georgia run defense we were talking about. Then on defense, they'll be schemed up and ready to at least try to cover and defend this Georgia running game. Should be interesting. We should learn a lot about this Georgia team in the season opening game. What kind of score are you expecting?
I think Georgia's going to run away with it late. It may be one of those things where in the first quarter, second quarter, you're ironing the kinks out, and it may be a one-score game at halftime. But I think Georgia's going to lean along that offensive line, those big boys, 300 pounds, run the ball late in the second half. And I think when you look at the weight disparity between Georgia's offensive line and Vanderbilt's defensive line, I think that's probably one of the X factors for Georgia. But you mentioned the kind of big 3 for Vanderbilt. Keyshawn Vaughn, Kalijah Lipscomb, and Jared Pinkney, all top 3 last year in the SEC in terms of yards gained for their position group. So Vanderbilt's got a little bit of a trio of their own that they're going to try to showcase.
Yeah, you never know. There's a little unknown with the season opening game. So with that in mind, Gosh, I think Georgia, I'd predict a score of Georgia 35, Vanderbilt 13, something along those lines in the season opening game. The Bulldog breakdown, Buck Belue, Hutson Mason, couple of old Georgia quarterbacks, one older than the other. But looking forward to talking Georgia football all season long here on the Bulldog Breakdown.